You've mentioned several times in our discussions here that trying to get in the other person's head, their shoes, as to where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you're going to give away the store, does it?
No, certainly not. I mean,
could you elaborate on that?
Well, what it is ultimately is that you're trying to make a deal that works well for both, and what you're trying to do is try to meet where both will be happy, right? I mean that, and I'd say, especially for me personally, I really, life is too short to develop bad relationships in any kind of a deal. You don't want to walk away with anyone feeling that they had been hard done by, because you don't know where the path is going to cross again, either personally or professionally. And so as a result of that, the being sympathetic and whatnot tries to establish what I would call more of a common ground, rather than have anyone be talked into surrender.
Winner take all.
Exactly. Yeah.
So where did Martin Singh acquire these values that he takes to the negotiating table and his interactions with others?
Are you talking about the compassion and sympathetic values there specifically? Yes. I think that comes from me being, born and raised, effectively in a pharmacy. I worked scrubbing the shelves since I was, 5 years old, and my father paid me $1 an hour at the time. We still talk about that and how he grotesquely underpaid his own son at the pharmacy.
That was pretty good money in those days, wasn't it? $1 an hour?
I'm not so sure. It sounds like you should be negotiating on my father's side there, David. but what it is that we saw a lot of people struggle, and there were times. And I can remember vividly, because, not just because there were one or two, very distinct occasions, although there were, but also because it happened often, that there were a fair number of occasions where, people would come into the pharmacy, particularly if it was for children, and Dad would put the prescription out the door, not charging a penny. And I questioned him about this. I can remember, and I was quite young. I don't even think I was a teenager at that time, and I said, Dad, what's going on here? And he said, the value of that medication to those people's children is more than the value of the money to us, and so you have to. You have to give sometimes, right? And you have to be compassionate, and you have to really, try to take care of those around you. And
but tell me, what happens to a Martin Singh who has this value system which is rooted quite deeply? And we can see that. That is part of your DNA.
Sure.
But what happens when it clashes against another force that doesn't have a similar value system, who wants winner take all? What happens in those situations?
Well, sometimes the deal doesn't get done, frankly. And it's okay that sometimes that happens, right? There was an occasion when, and I wouldn't say this is a winner take all, but I give it as an example, because the winner-take-all, or the corporate, and rather the compassionate and sympathetic approach, forms part of what we would maybe term corporate culture, and your overall, and how that fits into your overall business plan. There was one time what I thought was a very good deal for a gentleman, and it was actually here in Toronto. I sat down with him, and he's a manufacturer of drugs over in India. And also he does manufacturing here in Canada, very, very successful. Actually, he manufactures things here in Canada and ships to India, in fact, and you don't hear of that very often.
Too often.
No, you're correct. And so, and I came to him, and he said, Martin, that looks very nice, and it looks like that, someone could make a bunch of money at that, but it's not my business. And so what he was telling me there is that wasn't his focus. It would distract him away. It didn't fit in with the corporate culture and the corporate dynamic, or the plan that he had established for his business. And so while it was all fine and good, he wasn't particularly interested in picking it up. By that same token, you will have disconnects that perhaps exist because of the view that one or the other parties takes on a sympathetic or a compassionate basis, and as a result of that, sometimes the deal doesn't get done either, and it's unfortunate, but that's life.
But that's being very strategic, isn't it?
I think so. I think so, and that's why I have full faith really in the approach that I take and that our group takes. And that's why I feel very comfortable with it. And that being said, that we reevaluate our approaches certainly with time and how, because the economy changes, the political climate changes, economic climate changes, but at least so far, we've been very true to our values in that regard.
I think Michael Porter,
Yes.
the renowned economist at Harvard, who's written so much about strategy and competition, would certainly compliment you in the sense that strategically, you and your group have made the decision that our value system is what we're going to operate with. And if we have to work with others that don't have that value system, that deal probably is not going to get done.
And I would say that's exactly right.
And that's very strategic on behalf of the Precision Health Group.
Thank you.
Tell us about your dealing with multi-stakeholders. We can come back to politics, we can go to the business side, but you've been a man that have been involved in mental health issues, you've been a volunteer, you've been involved in the public policy. How do you facilitate, work with all of these multi-stakeholders who have the different interests, and how do you get them together in order to move forward?
It's an interesting thing, David. When you first have conversations with people, or when you first look at a particular issue, it may in the very beginning appear or look as though that the interests are very much divergent. But when you start to begin the conversation with various parties, whether they are, opinion makers or, journalists or industry advocates or whatever the case may be, you sometimes are surprised by by the responses that you get. What I mean by that is that you may in fact find that they're not as divergent as you may have originally assumed. And as a result of that, you are able to find at least the foundation of common ground from which you can establish the trust relationship, as we mentioned earlier, to then tackle the more difficult aspects of whatever it is that you're going after.
Is that a time-consuming process?
Yes, it most certainly is. It's particularly time-consuming if the various partners don't live geographically close, because I would say that the conversations of this nature function much better face-to-face than they do over the phone, and they're much better over the phone than they are through text or email. And so you very much want to get people in the room together, either one-on-one or as a group.
Tell me about your communication style. I mean, are you have to be face-to-face, or do you do a combination of the various technologies that are out there?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's an absolute requirement. I say that face-to-face is my preferred option, because you will read nonverbal communication from the person or people who are sitting across the table from you. That's very, very important. That will either give you insight as to what they are looking for, or to their fears and concerns. And you really want to be able to learn all what you can about those things so that you're able to address them directly, and overtly. Because what will happen as a result of that is that two things. one, they will see that you are being concerned with what it is that they're concerned about, which is good. And then also there will be an amount of learning that happens on your own side that will able to bring you closer to any potential resolution that you're trying to find in that issue.
What would you say to the young people, young students who are continuously texting and emailing? I mean, I've found in my own discussions with students is that a good number of them are reluctant to pick up the phone or to meet in person. They would prefer to send you a text or an email. And I'm not sure that, yes, they're much younger than I am and much younger than you.
Yes.
But I'm not sure that's an effective thing for them to do, particularly if they're on the hunt for a job, a promotion, or an activity. Any comments?
I would say this. I would say that I don't know all industries, and I don't know all economies. And so I would say that there may indeed exist, not just one or a few, there may exist many places where that type of communication, would be fine. In addition, it could be such that between those people who are doing the texting, they have a trust relationship that permits that kind of communication all on its own to lead to a negotiated solution. It's not one that I find works for me in terms of whether it be email or text communication. It's something that I use just to relay quick information, but I would never envision a deal being done through that particular method. But I can tell you that others have done it as an example, albeit a small example, when I built my own house. I wanted to meet the contractor. I wanted to have a conversation with them. I wanted to, discuss aspects, face to face about what was going to happen because I planned on living in that house for quite a long time. But he shared with me an example of a communication that he had with another person who was living out west and who was looking to build a house in Nova Scotia, and the entire contract, build, and everything was done by email. The person landed on the ground, turned the key in the door, and that was the very first time they ever saw it. It didn't work for me, and wouldn't work for me, but it was the contractor and the person who was purchasing the home and getting the home built. For them, their trust relationship allowed them to have that kind of communication, and it worked well for them. So I wouldn't say that there isn't any place for it, even though I don't use it. But also, along with that, I would say that there is nothing that teaches better than failure. And so for these folks in their life, when they're going through their various paths to try to achieve whatever it is that they're trying to achieve in their own definition of success, that if they find that they are hitting brick walls, as it were, as a result of their communication style, I think that they'll be plenty wise enough to choose an alternative format.
Can we come back to your business interest? When you're on the hunt for an acquisition, do you typically make the first offer, or do you ask the other side, what would they sell at?
Yeah, we generally wait for the other side to present us with an offer. That's our approach.
And what happens if they don't want to make an offer? Do you make one?
I'm trying to think if there's a case where we've gone out searching in that way. It has not been our experience with that, David. Like, it has been the case, like I'm thinking about every single successful acquisition that we have done. It has always been the case that the other group wanted to sell and stated terms.
So you would have done your due diligence.
Mm-hmm.
You would have scoped out the particular enterprise that would want to sell.
Yeah, done our due diligence, and so until, of course, there'd be more due diligence to do after once you see the financial documents and whatnot.
So you would meet with this prospective seller, and they would typically say, well, this is the sum of money that we would want in order to sell.
Correct. Correct. Well, and like I said, though, it's certainly dollars are an issue, but as I mentioned in the example before, there can be a whole number of either items that are tangible or intangible that they may want to be addressed as part of either the formal contract for the purchase or sale, or I guess what you would call the informal contract, the stuff that's not written down.
In anticipation of that first offer coming from the seller, would you work on a concession strategy going forward in terms of a counterproposal?
What we do is that because we know the two ends of our businesses very well, the pharmacy side and the care home side, what we do, we have a formula that we use for determining the value of the business. And so we can take the numbers, whether it's numbers of prescriptions per year or bed count. And when I say bed count, there's different types of beds that exist with different envelopes of funding. We're able to run it through a formula that we have generally to give us a ballpark number. And so then once we have that ballpark number, we match it up with what's coming from the other side. If they're completely out of whack, then we start asking questions. And when I mean completely out of whack, that's not necessarily completely out of whack that theirs is too much higher than ours. If it's also much lower than ours, then we also want to know what's going on there too, because it might suggest to us that there's something that we're missing on our end, and there might be some learning that can happen there as well. Although I'll tell you that it's not often that it comes in at a super low number, different than what we determine.
So as you prepare to counteroffer,
Yes.
Is there a margin of error that you can live with if somebody's selling, say, for $3 million and you're prepared to counteroffer at what, 2.3, 2.4?
I'm not so sure how comfortable I feel, David, making this public. But what I will say is that all deals are different. And so when it comes to the counter offer, I would say that what happens there is that there's a discussion held among the partners around what we all feel comfortable with, and then we proceed to make the counter offer. And I would say that also too, we tend to be a very patient group, meaning that we're not put off if we have to go back and forth, 10, 20, even 30 times before we're able to come to an agreement.
Elaborate on this patience, because you seem to be, your persona seems to be one of a very patient and a very deliberate man. Are you and your group that way as well?
I'd like to think so, but my partners might say otherwise. What it is that when you're willing and able to take time, then those who are on the other side, don't feel as much pressure to make a deal. Now, there might be people in negotiation who take a different tact on that feel that there is more to gain by applying pressure and time pressure to a particular deal. And I would say that might be something that is industry specific. I'm not sure, because I know my industry very well, and others would differ in that regard. And I state that because I don't want to pass judgment on them, meaning to say that I'm not saying that that's necessarily an incorrect method. I'm saying that for those in other businesses and other industries, that might be entirely the way to go. But for ours, the people on the other side are generally pharmacists or people who have cared for others in their part of the business for their entire lives. And so what it is then is that they want to see, or at least I feel that they want to see, that the person on the other end is giving them their proper space so that they can make the decision that works, for them in their best interest. And that automatically takes time. There are very few people who can scope, a deal in very short order and get through all the minutiae and the details, particularly if they're maybe selling the one and only business that they've ever had.
Which for a lot of people is a very emotional experience, is it not? Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, well, it is, because what's happening is that these folks are going to be entering into a new phase of their life where, let's say they're an owner of a care facility. Let's say it's like a mom and pop operation there. They're then effectively, going to be separating themselves from what has been a stable source of income. Yes, they're getting paid, a lump sum of money for their business, but that has been a stable source of income, perhaps for even 40 or 50 years. They're separating themselves from their clients, with whom they've established a strong, compassion-based relationship. And then also, too, they're separating themselves from their employees and whatnot, and the other broader business network, meaning the people who supply them, the people to whom they supply, if that's the particular nature of their business. And so they are separating themselves from a network that has existed in place for, really quite a long time. And it is emotional, and this is something that, they would have grown, they would be very proud of, and this also sometimes leads to people overvaluing their business as well, which can be a difficult thing to have a discussion about when people's heartstrings are so tied into it. And so that's why the patience is very, very important, and to allow time for people to have discussions back and forth until they find a place where they can feel comfortable with is really critical.
What would be the style of you and your group in terms of the counteroffer? So seller says, I want X.
Mm-hmm.
You don't believe it should be X.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to make a counteroffer. How thoughtful would you be in presenting a counteroffer? What would you take into consideration in terms of that offer? From this perspective, would you say, well, if we offer X minus Y, they're going to say no. So then we have to make a second counteroffer. Do you plan it out that way without giving away the
Sure.
The strategy of the Precision Health Group?
Yeah, well, like when you're doing your counteroffers and whatnot, there are not only two parties at the table. You then have whoever's financing you at the table as well, even though they're not present in the room necessarily. And so what will happen is that there'll be whatever number they decide, 4 times earnings, 5 times earnings, whatever, like however they evaluate that in terms of what they're willing to provide to you, which is interesting because that's not necessarily how we evaluate the business for what we have for our initial offer. And so what happens then on the counteroffer, if the counteroffer is such, like they come to us, we go back to them, and then they come back with a counteroffer. If the counteroffer exists outside of what's being circumscribed from a financing perspective, then it makes it very hard, David, frankly. If it exists inside what's being, what is, say, allowable from a financing perspective, then I'm personally, and I believe the other partners also, are very interested to learn how did they come to their number. Like why is it that they're valuing their prescription count at XYZ dollars per script and we're evaluating it at ABC? What's causing them to think this way? Because that might open our eyes. We might come back and say, okay, this makes sense. There's extra value here that we didn't see. It fits within the financing, the circumscribed financing rules that are being provided to us by our funders, and so we can go ahead with the deal at the higher price. Alternatively, if it comes back and they say that this is what they've come to and this is their decision-making process, and we really don't see it, then we have to share with them then actually the method that we use for evaluating, and tell them why the difference exists there, because then that may result in learning on their end.
When you go into these kinds of negotiations, particularly with the counteroffer, are you prepared to walk?
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
Have you had many occasions where you walked?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier where there will be maybe even as many as 9 out of 10 deals that cross your desk that won't end up being successful. Now, some of them you don't actually get into full formal negotiations. I mean, they come across your desk and you decide, either it doesn't fit within your business model or there's some other reason that you feel that you don't need to pursue it any further. And then there are others whereby you take it as far as you can go, and the discussions maybe last 6 months, but then ultimately you can't come to a negotiated agreement. And
What would you advise that third party that's out there who's watching our show in terms of walking away from a deal?
It is very important that you be open to that possibility, because you want to be wedded to your own business rather than to be wedded to any particular deal. Really, you have the potential to get yourself in some significant difficulty, I believe, if you get too wedded to any particular deal. Because how shall I put it? If it just doesn't work for you, then you shouldn't be trying to force it. Because if you're trying to force it there, you may find that you end up trying to force it for the whole time that you end up owning it, and it will bog you down, either in cash flow or time, or both.
What are some of the challenges in terms of trying to deal with a potential seller who is, in essence, in love with their business, but they now know it's time to move on? That must have some pretty difficult aspects to trying to make a deal in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, these are the folks that come, go, and then sometimes come back. And what I mean by that is that it also, there's sometimes I find a bit of luck there too. And what I mean by that is that if you are the first person that they deal with in trying to sell their business, they may see you as being unkind in what you offer. And so then they leave you. And then you will hear, you know, maybe some months later, that they went through a series of attempts with a bunch of other folks and sold it for almost the same or very near the same price that you are offering. And you don't always find out why that's the case, but sometimes you do. And what you sometimes find out is that they, over the course of being unable to successfully negotiate a deal with person or group after group, that they realize that in fact the way that they evaluated their business was not the way others would generally evaluate their business. And so there's a learning process that occurs for them through that. Ideally, what you would like to have happen is for the learning process for that exact same learning process to occur within the confines of your own negotiations, if you in fact want to buy that business.
Now, you've been involved in a number of different negotiations on the pharmacy side, on the care side. You've been involved in negotiations on public policy issues over the years. When you sit back and you're reflective, what are some of the qualities that come to your mind of being a good negotiator?
To be a good negotiator, you have to make sure you always operate in good faith. You have to make sure that this is done. Otherwise, the trust relationship that you're looking to build with the other party will not get established. And then it doesn't matter how patient you are at that point. It doesn't matter which facts are laid out on the table and whatnot. If you don't have that as an underpinning, then you really can't move forward, unfortunately. And it might sound like I'm coming back to the same thing over and over again, but it's because it is actually that important. That, or at least for me, you know, in negotiation, it's that important. That is your base, and then beyond that, you want to make sure that your homework is done on yourself. Make sure you actually know what you want, and how things fit for you. You do your homework on, you know, the other party.
So the checklist. Let's go through the checklist.
Well, that's it. That's it. You know, so your checklist is make sure you always negotiate in good faith, establish the trust relationship, make sure you actually know what you want, which might sound a bit ridiculous, but you know, you can sometimes find yourself in a place where you're partway through a negotiation and you're saying to yourself, what am I doing here? Perhaps this is not for me.
Have you ever encountered that on the other side, where they really don't know what they want?
Yeah, certainly.
Could you give us an example? Without mentioning names,
yes,
of course?
It's, what I find happens in these particular cases is that there's a complicating factor, meaning that it's people who are wanting to make a deal, but they're wanting to make a deal because there's something else going wrong in their life, meaning that there's an illness either with the owner or the owner's partner that's causing them to feel as though they're being forced and whatnot. And so what's unfortunate in these cases is that you don't almost have the option to be patient and for time. Like, we would be willing to give time, but there are other constraining factors for the other party that cause them to not have time even though we're willing to give it. And so what happens in these cases is that, deal making becomes difficult. It does. Because there's the aspect of time constraint, but then it also can be very emotional. And it causes the other party to sometimes not to be able to evaluate things as well as they would otherwise.
So coming back to your third point is establish your goals, know what you want.
Exactly.
Out of the negotiations. Yeah. Anything else in terms of that checklist?
Yeah, the next one after that, try to put yourself in the other people's shoes. Try to find as best you can what they are looking for. Not just what's on the paper, but also the other intangible items that they're talking about. Whether it's making sure they feel comfortable with you in terms of corporate culture, or in terms of how their employees are going to be treated, whatever the case may be. You might not find it on the paper in terms of the legalese, but it's something that could be either a deal breaker or a deal maker. And then the final one, although I say final, but all leads to this, is really do your best to make sure it's a win-win. Because these people who an example, let's say either in the pharmacy or the care business, these people have colleagues that may want to sell in the future. If you make it a pleasant experience for the person across from you in this particular event, their friend might come and say, geez, David, you just sold your care business. I'm looking at selling mine. And I hadn't really talked about it with anyone before, but now that I see that you've done it, I'm wondering what your experience was and how did it go for you? Well, if you battered the guy or the woman around the head, in the negotiation, even though you might have acquired that particular business or property, they're not going to be a good salesperson for you, right? They're going to say, geez, we had a really rough go.
The precedent has been set.
Yeah. It was a painful process, and Martin's a punishing person to deal with, and I don't like him very much. I mean, this is what would end up being, what would come out of that. Whereas what you want to have happen was, those four guys at Precision Health, they're a fantastic crew, and they
easy to work with.
Yeah, easy to work with.
Upfront.
We always felt that we had all the information that we needed. They gave us the time we needed to make the decision. We had XYZ thing happen in our family. They were sympathetic and let us deal with that before we moved on. And then that other person's going to say, hey, I might want to give these folks a call. And that has happened.
Before we close, I have to ask this question. What advice, I mean, you're a professional, you're an entrepreneur, you're interested in public policy, you're a very successful businessman. What advice would you offer to young people out there that may be watching our show as it relates to their own particular negotiations, either for a job or for a promotion that they might want to get at, or any of their routine negotiable items that they have to pursue both now and for the future? What advice would you offer those young people?
Yeah, always operate in a manner that's completely honest and in good faith. And even if you feel that taking that path may cause you to fail in that particular endeavor, don't stray from it, because there'll be learnings that will come out of that failure that will cause you to be stronger, better, wiser, and will ultimately, I believe, take you further to your goal than if you had compromised your values at that earlier step in order to try to achieve success.
Well, that's a great way to end our program. On behalf of the students at Ryerson University and the faculty here, I want to express to you our sincere appreciation for taking time out of a very hectic schedule to be with us and to share with us your views and your insights about the negotiating process. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.